Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duval, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who could be described as a serviceable knight of the crux ansata,
Tim Longo.
Yes. We were joking on the stream about how sometimes you pick up a weapon and it's just serviceable.
Yeah. It's one
You're
of
like,
the
what does that mean?
descriptors.
Is it good? Is it bad? Is it, I guess it's just okay. It's just fine.
I mean, it goes from serviceable is probably the second. It goes from excellent to probably serviceable, then to worn, then to badly worn. That's my guess.
Something
for
like
anything,
that.
Anything.
Right, all of them.
Yeah.
I think all of them have, unless they're like magical, and I think they're something different. But yeah. Anyway, of course, we're discussing. This is our final episode. We both finished Ultima Underworld this week, and that is just kind of extraordinary. So
Definitely. Especially because I think I realized that it's the first time I finished it. Yeah, that's my second confession for this game.
I love that. And then, in fact, people suggested I might need to hack it this time. So I'll get to that and we can talk about that because it's actually something we share. But tell me about when you realized that this was a game you hadn't actually seen the end of.
Yeah, well, I mean, the first moment I realized it was when you had to backtrack up from, I think it's level 7 up to 3 to get one of the 3 pieces of the key, the Triforce.
Right.
The Triforce.
Sure,
what did they call it? The
they just say the 3 keys. I don't think they call it a tri.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So,
I mean, I think I remember being surprised that I picked up one and it didn't look like a key. And then I picked up the other one and it went into an inventory slot and I had to unite them. And I was like, oh, okay.
That was cool when you reunite them. But yeah, I think my memory, my vague memory, because as we started playing, and I know I got to level 8, but I think I must have just gotten discouraged and given up trying to find the keys. I know I had found all 8 of the talismans, but the 3 keys probably stumped me. I probably had one of them. And I remember fighting a gazer in level 8 back in the day. And I think in my head, I had retconned it into that was the boss somehow. And, and I thought, oh, finished. Yay. And, and just kind of, got stuck and moved on or something. And then in my head had made up this story or something. Because I remember all the lava down there and kind of navigating it and jumping around a lot. But then as soon as you start making your way up to get that one piece of the key and the walls are all lava. So it's very hard to miss. I was like, wow, I've never seen this before. This is what's going on. And then I realized, I don't. And then if I didn't, and then of course, definitely knew that I didn't finish at the very, very end when you find the demon and you're running through the psychedelic hallucinations.
Hilarious. We'll totally get to that because that's its own thing.
It's a stumper. I definitely, as usual, due to time, I had to consult some guides at the end because it definitely gets pretty convoluted and it's easy to miss stuff. But we'll get into that too. So my second confession for a really pretty astounding game when it comes down to it, despite flaws.
Right. Yeah, no, this is, I and we'll talk about this more, I think, when we talk about our pillars and things like that. But when you look at a game that just tried so many different things, of course, they weren't all going to succeed. And I think one of the things that happens here in levels 7 and 8 is you get a lot of elements that weren't as deeply explored earlier. You have a lot more of those adventure game elements that I touched on last time, where you have connections back to other levels. And then 7 and 8, even geometrically, you have to go in between them. And that's really the first time that's been required. I mean, to progress on 7, you need to go to 8, and that's a new thing. Mm-hmm. In fact, I got to a point, I was in the habit, having learned this through 6 other levels, I got to the point where I would find a stairway down, and I just mark it on the map, like, oh, okay, here's a stairway down. And I would not go down it because I would be like, well, I have to find all the other ways around here. And in level 7 and 8 in particular, you actually need to go down, go through a thing. And incidentally, there were doors here that you had to break through and have no key, which is another thing that's just like, oh, suddenly you have to actually just break the doors to get through them. Total untaught thing.
And
or you could use, I guess, the open spell, I suppose, probably works as well.
Well, yeah, but the trick on 7 for a lot of the time, though, before you deal with the wizard is you can't use spells. So I was used to using open quite a bit. I think I probably skipped a few keys up above because of it, potentially, but that I didn't have that trick. So I didn't.
Yeah, I meant specifically on 8. There was a door that was marked with a sign saying something like there are evil undead through here or something like that, and that was a door that I just busted down. Although it occurred to me afterwards that I probably could have used the open spell. However, of course, on level 7, you've lost all your mana.
Yeah.
So I didn't have a lot of mana and wasn't going to sit there and wait for it. I was streaming this game, of course, this whole game, it's the first time I've ever done this actually, end to end to play the whole game on stream. Well, I mean, I had done that with earlier Ultima games, I guess, a few years ago, but I didn't have many people watching, and this time I had probably a dozen or two folks watching, and I appreciated all of them because they give me clues or hints and suggestions and things.
I was going to ask you how many, if that, because I was in my own isolated bubble, and I had a couple, I had a couple moments of depression, I think, because I was just overwhelmed with what to do next, and I really was trying hard not to look up clues and hints, but I ended up having to do it in a couple places that I would have stopped playing like I probably did 20 years ago.
I never would have found the cup talisman.
Yep, that cup I looked up.
That one I had actually last week looked up while we were talking on the show. I had looked up where they were, and that one I was like, oh, I've been here.
Yeah.
Well, there's no. Apparently there is an in-game way to actually determine that, but I didn't realize that at the time. And somebody explained that to me on the stream. Oh, there's a way to triangulate this from other information. I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, very opaque though.
Very opaque, and again, sort of an adventure gamey sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Clue these things together.
I also don't think I would have found the candle if we hadn't talked about it last time. I had said,
which was again another adventure game. Yeah, candelabra.
And you put 2 and 2 together, and I was like, huh, interesting. I wonder if he's right on that. I thought it was a long shot, to be honest. And so I went back up there, and the bummer about that particular one, not to get into the details, is that he has it in his trade window, but you can't actually kind of identify it there. It doesn't, you can't actually, you don't know if it's the one. So you kind of have to just, at least I couldn't figure out a way to do it.
I took it on faith.
Yeah, you just have to take it on faith.
Because it was twice as thick or whatever. I mean, I just assumed because it had a different piece of art. Yeah, that's a stretch.
That's rough. Yeah. So those are the two. Because
I had found it. I had found a pack that had a candle in it prior to that. And based on the description of Knights of the Crux Ansata, I had assumed that was the right one because they said some crazy guy had come in and just like stolen all these candles and run out. And only afterwards they realized.
Right. No, they did. I remember that dialogue. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And what I had assumed was that I also found like a scroll in that room that said something that made me think, oh, this is the crazy guy and his stuff is left here because he died around this location. Yeah. It was near the trolls area. And I just assumed, I carried around that candle all over the place and it was just an ordinary candle. And it was only last week when you said that I was like, oh, that's weird. That's a weird bit of information I didn't connect. You know? Also, because that one had puzzled me but for the same reason that it was not identified in any way. It looked like every other candle. And of course, once I found the actual one in Zach's possession, I realized, oh, okay, that looks different. it probably is different. I'm just going to go. I'm going to go with that. I hope it's right.
Yeah.
That would have stunk if I'd been in that final room and been like, good job, you did 7.
You threw a regular candle into the lava with the demon watching you. There was, what's it called? The writ of.
I never
Lorne?
found it.
No.
Writ of Lorne. That's correct. So, yeah, Lorne. Lorne Michaels, I believe. It's a Saturday Night Live reference.
I found it's an anagram for Lorne Michaels. I had found it because I essentially slaughtered those trolls because I was like,
oh, nice.
I definitely didn't play the way I usually play. I didn't make good choices sometimes and ended up having to kill groups of things. But yeah, I just went into that room that one troll leader was, and guarding. I didn't know what to give him. He wanted this was up on 4, I think, right? He wanted a gift, but I was like, what could I possibly give him? I tried a few things, so I just killed him. But then I don't. What do you do with the writ of Lorne? Who was asking for it again?
I don't. The head Dorn iron something.
Yeah.
Yeah, the head of the knights. But if you kill Roderick, that's all you need to get the banner.
So I think it looks like, I guess there's 2 different ways to do it then.
That may be true.
So a peaceful way and So, but I think what happened is I had it in my head that was one of the talismans. So I ended up I had 9 talismans in my talisman bag.
Oh, well done.
And I wasn't sure what it was, and so there I was at the end throwing all of them in, and then the writ is just this paper that goes and just flies into the lava and just sits there. It doesn't burn or doesn't do it. And I was like, I guess that wasn't one.
Yeah, no, they want you to get that to prove something, your valor or something like that. Yeah, it's one of the very the many virtues of the avatar that you're supposed to. Speaking of the avatar, do you know what ansata means?
No,
I looked it up. It's Latin for handle.
Handle. What are you referring to? What's ansata?
The Knights of the Crux ansata.
Oh, okay. Handle?
Yes.
The Knights of the what's crux mean?
Crux is a cross.
Cross.
A handled cross is an ankh.
Oh, okay.
I thought that was pretty great. So you're basically the Knights of the Avatar, and you're the Avatar, and they don't know. Yeah, the ankh. Yeah.
Interesting.
It took me a while. It took a while for that penny to drop because I looked it up a week ago or so on the stream, and when I first encountered them, I'm like, I don't know what that means, but it sounds Latinate, and I looked it up on my phone or whatever, and
that's cool.
Yeah, and it said with handles or something like that as the Latin for it, and I'm like, that's really strange. And then it finally 10 minutes later connected up the dots to me, like, that's what they call an ankh. It's actually one of the covers of the Ultima games is the Avatar with the ankh in one of his hands hanging, like I think it's the 5th one, maybe.
Maybe 4? No,
it could be 4.
Yeah.
Could be 4. It's
4
or 5. It is one of the more famous covers. It's not 6 because 6 has the 3 like wraiths or whatever, but it's 4 or 5, and he's standing in the bad weather, and he's got the ankh in his right hand held down by his side. It's a memorable cover.
Yeah.
So anyway,
that's good.
I put it all together. Yeah.
I wonder if that's from other. Are those knights? Does that group from other Ultimas?
I don't remember them from any of the Ultima games, so I think that may be specific to this.
I mean, as a little segue, one of the topics we talked about in pre-show that I wanted to hit very quickly is there were a lot of nice little story moments that popped up that I just was really surprised and delighted and were unexpected for me. Things, just the sort of fully realized connected sort of civilization of the dungeon, and we'll get to sort of the level design bits, I'm sure in a bit, but that the fact that they thought that through for the knight's name, and and we mentioned in pre-show the Judy and Tom quest, and kind of some poignant little descriptions of what happens when you finally give her the picture, and the bit of the history about what happened to him, Tom, and there's just a lot of nice. There's always on some level. On every level, there's somebody who's looking for somebody who's lost, of course, because that's a good trope. And then you eventually either find the person alive or their remains, and there's just a nice little, memorial for them there, and you see, and you kind of put two and two together, and you find, a book or a sword or something from that person that they were talking about fondly, and just it was a cool little. More story than I remember. It gets to the point
where it almost feels thematic, because it's also sort of the impetus for the whole quest, because of course the daughter is lost because she's been kidnapped, and
it's a place where nobody returns, right? And they've been locked up in here.
Yeah, in a sense, for sure, and also in a sense, your good name is lost because you're the Avatar and you've done all these heroic things for Britannia and all this stuff, and yet you're blamed. You've lost your good name and honor and what have you, and have to recover it. And then, you're right. There are a ton of little connections of things that have been lost between them. I think that it kind of disappears a little bit for the first few levels. Maybe, and then you don't, and then those connections start to become a little bit more clear. I guess the third level maybe is where the lizard men appear, and maybe the third or fourth when Judy is there, and all of that stuff. So that stuff starts to sort of come together at that point. But it's pretty remarkable.
It's just surprising how much they thought that stuff through, and it makes. At a time when there wasn't a lot of depth for those sorts of things in these games, that makes the search for something like that a little bit more meaningful,
Right.
Even just a couple sentences of text is all I had, and so is all we had. So it's, it's just enough to want to go look. And then when you find that name, or you find a letter with somebody who had left behind with a skull and a key or something, and they left a little note about what happened to them. And, it's just, those touches are cool. And it's sort of the environmental storytelling we do today, but on a very, very basic level, but it was enough. So,
and I think the fact that it is this self-contained dungeon of these 8 levels and all that stuff, and which ties again into the themes of the Avatar's virtues and all that stuff that we've talked about already with the 8 talismans and etc. It feels like all of that is of a piece in a way, and underlying it all is this sense of loss, which really gives. I mean, because of course the whole Stygian Abyss or whatever is a lost world in a sense, because it's Cabirus's failed experiment because he died or whatever, and it all kind of fell apart. So there's just this underlying melancholy or loss throughout the whole thing, and lots of individual stories kind of reinforce that in a small way. And because it's not too big, all of that stuff lands in a way that it doesn't, I think, in open world games often. It's very difficult to tie stories together because you could go and do a million other things and come back. And have a hard time putting those things together and even remembering that they go together. That said, I mean, one of the things we talked about pre-show as well was that the whole one of the issues with games of this era is that you could lose track of all these stories very easily. Usability wise, none of this stuff is reinforced to you, and you basically have to keep track of it yourself. And in fact, because I thought Tom and Judy was a one-off sort of Easter egg programmer joke, that maybe there's a programmer whose girlfriend or wife was Judy, I did not recognize that as a genuine clue when I encountered it on the 3rd or 4th level or whatever it was. And so when I got to the end, I was happy to have folks on the stream prod me with, oh, you've met a Judy before or met a Tom before. Again, Mark Eldridge is the knowledgeable one who's played this game a billion times. But I was able to remember it but I would not have had I not had that sort of information. It would have taken. I would have had to scour the levels again in a way that would have been frustrating and possibly shelf level events.
Well, yeah, and that's what I for my last session before I got pretty deep into 7 and 8 and figuring all that stuff out. I actually went back up to 1. And I did start to systematically start scouring and looking for all the things that I might have missed and things like that. And I realized there's no way. There's no way I'm going to go through all of the levels. I started re-annotating my map and kind of cleaning that stuff up and stuff I didn't need anymore and kind of, trying to use your system and all of that stuff. And then it just was like I would never have finished. So I had to barnstorm down below, and I kind of just skipped stuff. After the fact, I read about. Did you get the fancy sword that's down in somewhere I think in 7?
Right, there's a sword of accuracy or something like that. I didn't.
The black sword of accuracy or something like that.
Apparently, that's the most effective sword in the game. Right? Yeah.
No, I didn't get it though.
No, somebody. I think it was Mark again told me about that. But for me, having the unbreakable sword was all I really wanted. It was something I didn't have to worry about the durability of. I was worried going into the final room that I was going to throw all these things away and then have no weapons.
Yeah, no, I had the same thing. No, I was looking for a backup sword and shield going in. But then I kind of reread what they are asking you to do in one of the facts that I was reading. I was like, oh, okay, I guess maybe you don't fight this thing. And so I just went to see it.
No, I think so. I think that you might have had to fight some of the fire elementals and things like that. For me, I had a ring of invisibility on, and I didn't aggro anything.
Yeah.
And I went into that final room, and it was almost anticlimactic, that part of it. There's a demon sitting in the middle of this big pool of lava, and I'm just like dragging things from my inventory into the lava. La 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 la. I mean, I was trying to do it pretty quickly, but.
Well, he's in a binding spell anyway,
right? Some sort of dimensional prism or whatever. Yeah, prison. But there were also some fire elementals that started to appear as I was dropping things in. I was like, oh well, I'm glad.
Oh, there were. I didn't even
invisible.
see him. Yeah,
yeah, there were. I saw at least one. There may have been more than one that I saw as I threw things in, and then we had the crazy maze thing. Which I guess we can talk about now. And I mean, we can sort of pick and choose our order of things. That was wild and maybe a little long.
Yeah, too long.
But on the other hand, not failable. So it's kind of okay.
Yeah,
okay.
I ran out of health.
I did too. Yeah.
Okay, it must have been just immortal. You just must have been immortal, but
right, you're effectively unkillable at that point.
Yeah, just a funny, and then even the portal that opens up immediately when you throw the final one in, and the kind of screen effect that they do, where they kind of tilt the camera, and just cool and hilarious at the same time. And then some of the hallucinations, the images, like these hellhounds and eyeballs and
eyeballs and
a fish. Did you see that fish thing? It was just like a weird.
I do seem to remember a fish. Yeah,
and skull. Yeah, skulls. Just and then if you turn, I don't know if you did it, but if you turn around and look, he's coming. He's chasing you.
Oh no, I didn't.
Yeah,
I was just running out. I didn't know that. So it may be possible to fail there, but I didn't.
Yeah,
I just kept falling because it's not actually a maze. There's only one way at any point. It was not so bad. I mean, one of the things the thing it reminded me of most was Max Payne.
Oh,
I don't know if you remember. There were dream sequences in Max Payne.
Mm-hmm.
And they made the mistake in that game. I would call it a mistake of having dead ends and things like that. So you walk into the space and you're bouncing on this tightrope already, and it feels weird. And then there's like a maze basically where you can literally get lost and make the wrong turn. And it's just, I mean, that's those sequences were neat because they did some interesting camera effects and things like that. And then I think they went too far on the level design of like, oh, let's make it possible to get lost. And it's like, well, no, Don't do that. You're already doing enough to make the player feel off kilter and unsettled. Just let them, sure, make them turn a lot so it feels like they're lost, but don't actually make it possible to be lost. Here, I think they made a really good decision of just keep moving. If you just keep moving, you're fine. You just need to have the courage to keep moving.
Yeah.
And I thought that was actually
it's very
terrific.
Faith-based.
Perfectly happy with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you?
Yeah, no, it's like an Indiana Jones thing. There was actually a couple of references to that because the thing with the golden path through the maze.
I love that section.
I really liked.
I was going to mention that. Yeah, wearing the crown and having that
the crown without the bloodshot eye.
Yeah,
which was another sort of adventure gamey sort of riddle / puzzle.
That was really cool.
People kept referencing Indiana Jones because it felt like it's not the penitent man will pass, but it's the one after that, the man of faith will pass, or whatever it is, says, where he throws the sand out and it's some weird optical illusion, right? Where he can't actually see the stone bridge, but it's there.
Yeah.
But he can't see it because of his perspective, which is a great moment in those movies. But also a good moment here where because I had saved at one point going into that maze and kind of ran around for quite a while before I finally stepped off the path.
What happens? I don't think
you just die.
Oh, instantly?
Yeah.
Oh,
it just
funny.
kills you.
I thought maybe they'd shoot something at you or something at least, but no, you just
there's no player skill way to get around it. You have to find the thing. I mean, I presume, I guess, one player skill way around it would be to actually map it out yourself. It would be possible to do it without the crown. I can't imagine that, but I think it's possible.
Yeah, and it's probably flying wouldn't have worked either because it's probably three-dimensional volume.
Yeah, no, I don't know. That's interesting. That
no, you
really
couldn't
curious.
fly because you can't use.
Oh, right, because you don't have any magic.
Well,
right, because
maybe there's a scroll. There's a flying scroll. At least one you find.
There's a flying potion.
Yeah. Let's game the system.
I wonder if you could use a flying potion and get around that.
Somebody's tried it, I'm sure.
I'm sure.
The other thing that I also read after the fact, and the fact I was reading that I totally forgot about, but did you remember the crystal ball on the first floor that you find and you can look at it?
Yeah, no, I did. Yeah, for sure.
And it tells you to follow the green path or something, or it tells you something about that ending sequence, which way to go, which wasn't hard to find anyway. But talk about a clue that was 40 hours ago. I mean,
yeah, no kidding. I didn't connect that. I mean, I do remember somebody saying something about an orb that let you see into something else,
there's two orbs. One. Did you find the orb where you can look into it and it shows you the moonstone room? Did you find that?
That's what that was.
Yeah, I found it after I already had them.
Right, because I never did the gateway spell, so I never made my way to the moonstone. I finished the game without it. Yes. Okay, right. Because you could have found another. There's a couple gateway scrolls you could use to get there. Yeah. Right. But because they didn't identify for me, I didn't use them.
Right.
I just had a stack of spells at the end of the game that I never used.
Well, so what?
Or a stack of scrolls, rather.
Because I got the moonstone before I found that other orb, which is on the same floor, and I think that's how they're supposed to. It's a clue. You're supposed to be a clue that there is a moonstone in existence.
Right.
But when I looked at the orb, it was just a bunch of slug carcasses were there, and because I already had been there.
Oh, because you'd already been there and killed them, of course.
So
right.
This camera swap, which there's also a spell. I forget what it's called, where you can actually.
It's like flying eye or something like that. Roaming.
Yeah, roaming eye. Yeah. It's just, God, man, there's so much in this game. I just forgot how, and many of the skills I just didn't end up using very much, so it'd be interesting to kind of really delve deeply into all the different other ways to play. Like stealth is an interesting one, because you definitely could focus on that. And I guess it's like invisibility. You could probably get around things, but the reason that I actually instigated quite a few fights I didn't need to toward the end, is I wanted to hit max level. So like those trolls and then the goblins on level 7 that you technically, I guess, can talk your way through some of that stuff. I decided just to kind of wipe them all out because I just wanted to farm for XP. And so
I didn't make it to level 16. I was level 15 when I finished.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I did. Let's see, where was I? I think I hit level 16 on my ascent back up to get that key. That one part of the key, on the
right,
which we should probably talk about that backtracking stuff now too.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I maxed. I got to max that out. And my
I mean, I had at that point I had all the spells, which is all I really needed at that point.
You could cast the level 8 spells.
You can cast level 8 spells at level 15 or 16. It's level divided by 2 rounded up.
Okay, right. Math.
Yeah, math. Lots of math. Lots of that weird math in these games.
Yeah, so and as soon as I hit level 16, I took a picture. I was so excited.
Oh. I was lucky. I had somebody did a Twitch clip of my ending screen because nice. It passed by for me really quickly because of they're basically in the GOG version. If you're holding down the mouse, it's like a repeated mouse event instead of individual clicks. It happens all the time. You go to pick something up and it's too heavy, and you get 3,000 messages that are this thing's too heavy.
That's only in the GOG version. Because
it might be in
emulation.
I don't know. It might be because of emulation. I'm not really sure. But I basically click through the congratulations, you should call Origin screen, and they go to stats, and it went super quick because I had clicked, but it built up some number of messages in the queue.
I missed my stat screen. It was the opposite for me. I got the congratulations, and then the stat screen went by really quickly, so I didn't get to see that.
No, well, it went by quickly for me, but because I streamed it, it's out there.
Nice.
Yeah.
But yeah, on the backtracking, I think one of the frustrations, and I would say definitely one of the main reasons I ended up consulting a FAQ at the end, because I just was really losing track of what I was doing, and I wasn't taking, I guess, good enough notes. But Brett mentioned it a little bit earlier, but the interdependentness of the different levels, not only the navigation between 7 and 8 and kind of going back and forth, and certain stairways going to only some sections that were cut off from the rest of the level, like the 7 and 8 thing. But I think, just the fact that there were so many quests that were not even just through 7 and 8, but most of the levels had some sort of related quest that was on a different level, sometimes many levels deep, that you had to go back up to, to actually finish them. And then not only quests, but then that final, for me, it was the final key. The key,
right? Yeah, me too.
Yeah, that one that
the tier
all the way down to 7, and then go all the way back to that sort of special section for each level. And I was telling Brett in pre-show, I remember kind of vaguely when I played this back in the 90s, there was that whole section that I never found that was over in the northwest, that I thought were just a bunch of secret rooms that I never could find. And I remember just being fanatical about trying to uncover them. And it turns out, it's just accessible with this sort of backtracking or sort of going down to 7 and then going back up. And so it's really impressive that they chose that to be a goal for theirs, that they tried to make this fully connected dungeon, but it definitely doesn't help in the, as you said already, the memory space of what, and taking diligent notes about what to actually remember to do and who said what and where was this person. And so, yeah, it's definitely frustrating in this day and age with the internet out there, helpful for games like this. But back in the day, man, this was a restart for me multiple times. And as I said, I guess I didn't even finish it then. So.
Yeah, no, I think there's with games of this era, there's a lot of opportunities for hitting walls of different kinds. And here, I think, yeah,
many walls.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I can imagine you you have the wrong conversation with the lizard people and they kill Murgo, and now you can't get the wine of compassion or whatever ever, and you don't even know. There's things like that I think are possible that are really a problem. I didn't have issues like that. I was really concerned getting down to that last level because I had saved multiple times and was not able to open one of the doors. And in the stream chat, again, Mark, I think, was saying, I'm a little worried because you need to be able to get in there. It's critical path to get through the end of the game because you get one of the pieces of the key, or I guess you get Tom's portrait from one of the guys, and in the prison you have to have it. Yeah. But I couldn't. That gate would not open. They wouldn't talk. The goblins wouldn't talk to me because I had gone about getting into their whole area the wrong way. I jumped over a space and onto a bridge or a walkway or something like that to get in there, and had alerted them. I mean, it all went kind of horribly wrong. But to the game's credit, it actually allowed that, and it corrected for it, and it was okay in the end. But I could have imagined that going a different direction, and especially with a game of this era, finding out that, oh no, turns out you have lost this game. Sorry about your 30 hours, but that this game is over for you now. So I'm lucky. I felt like I was lucky, and I felt like it did pretty well. Anyway.
Yeah, the QAing process of this game must have been very interesting. Because they probably, hypothetically, there probably would have been a bug. Let's idealistically say there was a bug written up about that. And then to troubleshoot it, they were probably discussing what are the different ways you can get around this sort of almost a bug problem. And I told Brett I was stuck on the same door. What I realized after the fact is I didn't think, I guess what I thought is I had to go to the prison before going to Tibble, the wizard. And
and I think that was the intention.
Well, but he drops the key to the prison.
He does. You sort of get a skeleton key to the whole level at that point. Yeah,
but you can go in.
You are supposed to get into there beforehand because they give you information that makes it.
Yeah, you can.
It makes it easy. It makes it easier to figure out what you're supposed to do on the level if you can get to them.
Yeah, you can bash through some of the doors, but not all of them. The critical path doors at the end of the prison need his key, but you can kind of go in for the first couple of rooms and then leave and then come back after you kill him. So but I was stuck on that same door, but then I realized I had the moonstone at a certain place. And so I could port out. And my point is, in my case, it was the moonstone that allowed me to kind of retrace myself and kind of start that particular level over and kind of wind my way through. But there's multiple kind of ways you can finagle the game enough to kind of get yourself around things. And that's probably what QA would end up saying. It's like, well, this is kind of, you could get stuck here, but if you do this and then this over here, then you can kind of get yourself unstuck. But it's not really forgivable to some degree because, it's like now you're creating your own solution for a puzzle that wasn't even intended to be a puzzle. You know what I mean? It's like, I'm stuck. Yeah, okay, how am I going to get myself out of this? Well, I could get creative and go do this, this, and this. And that's definitely to the credit of the game. It's emergent enough and dynamic enough to allow the player to be creative. And that's what I think I love so much about it. But like you said, you can end up on the other side of that and really just be screwed. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No. And I think the game is definitely teaching you throughout the game. You've been taught lessons that turn out not to be really true, but you've made some assumptions like the level thing that I talked about before, that each level is basically self-contained. You don't need to go down to come back up to get to some area of the level that you couldn't. It might be only possible to get to some area of the level. And I can sort of see it where maybe they're on level, I guess 4 going down to 5. They're sort of teaching you, some parts of 5 are only accessible from 4 from different places, like going across the bullfrog puzzle. I mean, I feel like there are little hints like that maybe make the suggestion like, it might be possible then to also only to be able to get to level X pieces from level X plus 1, 7 into 8 and back. But I didn't make that leap, and I would have had a hard time. I mean, probably at a certain point you'd be frustrated and be like, well, I don't know what else to do. I'll just go down, and you'd find it, maybe. And that's certainly a way that I think games worked back at the time, is that when no other avenues were open to you, you would explore things that were not obvious. That doesn't feel magical in the way that some things about this game have. When we talk about the sort of racing to usability, that's a usability thing that I think we're glad to have.
I wrote a note down toward the end when basically saying, I feel like this game is the reason why quest logs were invented. You know what I mean? It's like, we all, and obviously I can't give the game maybe that much credit. I don't actually know, but it felt like for me in my life, like this was the game when I remember, now replaying it was like, man, at this time it's so complicated. And so there's so many interdependent, like to your point about like, so there's the scouring kind of method of like, okay, I'm just going to try to figure out what this space is that I haven't been to before, and you can find stuff that way. But the other thing is they generally use clues from dialogue trees to be kind of your main way of getting your clues on a lot of important things. And there's no tracking of that. You have to either write it down or whatever. And so, like that stuff these days is just tracked in quest logs and stuff. And I feel like this was the straw that broke the camel's back. It was like, well, they made
for sure.
the best connected world they could, and then broke players because it was so complicated.
Right. Now, I almost feel like that this was, I mean, I'd have to go back and look at the history, but it feels like 92 or 93 is sort of when the RPGs started to wind down. And when we talked about there being an RPG renaissance around Baldur's Gate and Planescape Torment and that engine, I think it was because of games from this era.
They got too heavy
from the early 90s, which just didn't have the systems to support the dreams that they had. I mean, their systems were writing checks that their usability couldn't cash, I guess, or something like that. But it feels like that this was the time where RPGs started to wane, just entirely because of this stuff, that it was just impossible to keep track. If you went away from the linearity of games like the gold box games, and even there were some sort of adventure gamey or sort of RPG, pen and paper type puzzles you might have that I can remember. They weren't terrible to keep track of. There weren't lots of them, but here, you never know. And something that feels throwaway like that bit of graffiti with Tom and Judy, mostly because of the names, which I will contend are really terribly chosen. If they had been more something more appropriate, I think I would have kept track of them better. I mean, it's Corwin who sends you in here. It's not Bill. It's stuff like that. I think that makes it a little trickier. That's an Ultima hallmark as well. There's always been weird tonal stuff with this series going back to the first couple 2-3 games. That's just strange, but that's not stuff you want to lean on. Anyway, I was going to suggest we take a quick break and then come back, do our pillars, and tackle some feedback.
Yeah, sounds good.
Hi, and welcome back from the break. We've been talking about Ultima Underworld, and we're going to get to some of your feedback in a moment. But first, as we like to do at the end of these series, We have some sort of takeaways or pillars that we think are really important about the game, and that we might, the sorts of things that we might like to incorporate into our own practice as game developers. And as usual, I will throw over first to Tim, even though that'll probably mean he'll steal some of my own takeaways. But you go ahead, sir.
Shared takeaways.
Well, I'll share these takeaways, I think, for this one in particular.
I mean, yeah, we were so on the same page for so much of this game in particular. Yeah, I mean, I think the one that is pretty obvious that I'll start with, that hits multiple subpoints that we've talked about over the whole series is just the full commitment to simulation of the dungeon. And I wrote down a couple specific little examples that I think are hilarious and awesome and amazing for the time. And maybe pieces of these were done in other games individually, but as Brett said earlier, kind of having them all in one game is pretty astounding. But one example that we didn't talk about in previous episodes is the fact that food actually gets bad over time or becomes stale. Yeah, so fresh food is better for you than stale food. And if you keep food in your inventory and then sleep, it'll be a day old, and then it'll get stale. And so just the concept that they kept track of that and that food has a sort of state. We've
literal shelf life. Yeah.
Yeah. We've talked about durability and all those sorts of things, but it's just, it's on so many levels. I won't list them all. The other funny one that I reflected on this last session was the fact that blood spots are left for every enemy that you kill. And the concept that they were willing to have those objects stay in the world, and as you are backtracking or going, searching for the next clue or you're stuck, you're kind of going through these corridors, and many of the fights I would remember because I saw that blood pool on the ground, or maybe it was a green blood pool, and it was a spider or a slug or something, and so
or a rat or whatever.
Yeah. So just and in other cases like golems, I think dropped like this sort of dust, like material, coal or something, or dirt.
Yeah, specters just sort of disappear, and so do gazers, I think. Like they just sort of...
Yeah, some things, and like the imps, right? They would just kind of...
And the disappear. Imps, the gargoyles or whatever. I love that about this, the simulation elements. I mean, that's kind of ties into sort of the thing that I want to talk about, which was... just pushing forward anything you could think of. I mean, we talked about, because the bar to entry of putting something in a game at this point for visualization cost or whatever was so low, at least in terms of like actual art costs or something like that, it might take some programmer time to make it efficient and things like that, especially on older systems of the time. But just going for it and including everything you could think of to make it a fully formed simulation was pretty great. A lot of this I feel like was borrowed or influenced by the Ultima series as a whole.
Yeah.
But I can remember in Martian Dreams, in fact, having basically the food problem, although it was something else there. You had to have this like special oxygenated chewing gum, essentially, because of the thinness of the Mars atmosphere. And you would be running out, and until you actually figured out where you needed to go to make Mars have an atmosphere again, which is a whole thing, spoilers, sorry, for this game that came out 25 years ago, you had like all this simulation pressure of having to deal with this stuff. And that's sort of what's going on here. Because it's a magical world, however, you have the opportunity to basically just create food. I'm just going to cast the spell and take care of that. But it involves you in sort of the day-to-day maintenance of feeling embodied in the world in a way that I think a lot of games at the time didn't. You never really felt that way in something like Wolfenstein, where you could carry as much ammo as made sense. You could carry 6 guns or what have you, and the same thing would come later with Doom. This is a game that more is involved in throwing in a ton of ideas, all of which are meant to just support the core fantasy of you're in this place. And I think that leads to games like you've mentioned before, the Elder Scrolls series, but especially Arena, which is a couple of years later or a year later or something like that. I think 2 years later. And it's this commitment to making a complete and believable world and lots of different sorts of things in it. Not lots of really polished systems. I mean, we talked about how the numbers in this game make no apparent sense. There's things that are in single digits, double digits, and then digits of, I don't know, up to 4 digits, I guess, for experience. Things are kind of all over the place. But the fact that they're willing to try to shoehorn every little system they can think in just to make it more realistic and make that the high bar that they're trying to reach is really, really important to this kind of game. And because they constrain it to this single dungeon, which might be a really small part of an Ultima 6 or 7 or whatever at the time, because you go into dungeons all the time. You go into a dungeon, you go multiple level downs, you come back out, and then you continue on your adventure. Here it's all in this one small part of something bigger. I don't know. It feels like it also, in a way, enlarges those other games that came before it. So there's a lot going on here to love as far as that goes.
Well, and I think also their goal of interconnecting the systems, like light was also one that I wrote down. You know, the way that they leverage light and the different uses of light. And then the other thing with food is it also relates to sleeping. If you're hungry when you go to sleep, when you wake up, you're not going to have you're not going to be satiated, and you won't have as much health, right?
Right, you don't get as much health restored or mana.
Yeah,
or whatever.
So it's just kind of just having all that stuff. So those are just a few, but I mean, it's just they just go. We talked about combat, and we talked about a bunch of the others on other episodes, but yeah, and I think that the concept of you hit the nail on the head on focusing on one dungeon enabled them to kind of go that deep in an interesting way. So yeah. What about you?
I think the thematic stuff that we've talked about, and so I won't dwell on it because we've talked about it several times, but the themes of loss and pairings that are broken up and things like that, but also the 8 talismans, the 8 tribes, the 8 virtues of the avatar, the 8 levels of the dungeon, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, I think are all interesting. I mean, I don't know that they have any broader motivation, but sometimes that's enough. It's sometimes just enough to commit to some central motivating idea and just seeing it again and again. One of the things that I think it was H.P. Lovecraft who said something about the number 23, whereas it's just a number, and it, like any other number, it probably appears all the time in your natural environment. You just sort of see it sometimes, but once you start looking for it, you start seeing it everywhere, and it's, oh my God, and here I feel like it's the same sort of thing where you just motivate a thing just by your own fiction. It's not inherently meaningful. I mean, it's not the 12 traits of Boy Scouts or whatever that are, you could have picked up on something else. You've got these 8 that are specific to Britannia and the Ultima series. And that's just the way it is. And I don't know, I kind of love that purity that there's just this, oh, these are the things we've chosen, and these things are important in our world, and we're just going to commit to those being important. And I think that's kind of lovely, and it ties into all the themes of this game. And so I really like that. I admire that. It's one of the reasons I've always liked the Ultima series. So. Yeah,
it always was thematic. Yeah, that's a good point. I think the other thing that I loved about the rule set of it, once you figure it out and you know about it, is, for me at least, it was sort of like, okay, so what's the next group of people, or what's the next civilization I'm going to find down there, because I know there's 8 of them, right? And they kind of talk about them and they foreshadow them, and so it kind of builds anticipation as well, of like, oh, okay, I'm going to find people keep talking about the seers. Who are these seers? And then you finally get down there and like, oh, they're the seers, and they talk about their academy that is sort of like, they're now defunct and all this stuff, and it's just, and they talk about each other, so, and then of course, the fact that there's 8 talismans, and okay, what are the 8? Which okay, I have 4 of the 8. How am I going to get the other 4? Those sorts of little internal monologues you have. I do think the key thing was a bit of a extra thrown in there thing that I don't think they needed, but
yeah, no,
but yeah,
not everything coheres, because I think the last couple of levels in particular, these that were basically the focus of this play, were probably not my favorite, though there were individual elements I really liked. I really liked the sort of figuring out what's a quest and what's not of the earlier levels. In the first level, I didn't know if I was supposed to try to poison the Goblin King or whether they would care that I killed that special spider that they hated or whatever. But as time went on, it was more clear that, oh no, I really need to, for these mountain men, I need to go and clear out their minds, or I need to, whatever, for the Knights of the Crux Ansata, I actually need to go and try to find that writ of Lorne, or deal with this Terminator dude, Roderick, etc. So I like that sort of loosey-goosiness. I think that, again, you do lose some of that from usability. I'm not sure that that's a bad choice, just based on, I mean, this is a game that sold probably fewer than 500,000 back in the day, probably in the more to like 200 to 300,000 unit type window. And that's just not sustainable for a modern game.
Yeah.
But, it's sustainable for an indie game. So indies out there who are thinking about your RPGs, hey, maybe give it a look.
Yeah. So what about
a lot to love?
Did you have another pillar or takeaway that you?
No, I mean, I think those are the biggest things for me. I think I like this the sort of open-endedness of the skills system, but I don't. It's not a big takeaway for me. I think you kind of need that for an RPG like this. I think if you were locked in, I think that's actually one of the problems of Baldur's Gate or Icewind Dale, that if you choose a class that's not well supported by the game, you're kind of screwed. And those games came along in the 5 to 10 year window after this. Here it's, you start with some initial conditions. They're not limiting in a serious way. If you want to then become a fighter or a mage or whatever, that's just your choice. I like that openness.
Or a shepherd.
Or a shepherd. If you really want to be the weakest possible class, you can choose to be a shepherd instead of a bard, which of course everybody knows is the most heroic. It's the heroic one. Yeah.
Yeah. The only other,
you want to be around to sing your exploits. That's for sure.
They're important. One of the most important characters in the Witcher series is a bard. Yeah, and I think the only other quick takeaway that I'll throw out there that we've already hit quite a bit is just the interconnectedness of the levels between them, because I think I mentioned this in pre-show or maybe even post, but once we started. But the games of this era, like the ones we've mentioned, like Bard's Tale, Eye of Beholder, and Gold Box, and even Brett mentioned even just sort of pen and paper D&D, generally modules were fairly all-inclusive sort of, levels one by one. So you didn't really kind of...
Yeah, or even just encounter to encounter. They were just very...
Yeah.
Sometimes there were sort of puzzles and things like that, and if you were clever, you could find some use of something that you found. But for the most part, it was, oh, I did this room. Now I went to another room.
Yeah. And it was meant to be, pacing wise, it was meant to be, sessions, right? So you're not going to play the whole dungeon in one session. So it was like, oh, finish off this level, and then you don't need to look back. You can just go to the next level and then play a few hours to finish that one off. And they really seem to choose to really interconnect the levels to get this sort of sense of this full ecosystem across all of the layers of the dungeon. And that was a goal that, hit sometimes and missed sometimes, but it definitely seemed like a different step and direction for the games of the time. So I just wanted to call that one out really quickly. But
yeah, for sure. I mean, the narrative. I mean, it's funny too because the narrative sort of reinforces that with Sir Cabirus and him trying to establish basically these communities that work together and all that stuff. But I also love that the first time you encounter the major way to connect them together is that central staircase. It's just been covered over with stone. It's been collapsed or whatever. And that's just great because you're sort of in this, I mean, I wouldn't say Eden, but you are sort of in this fallen utopia of all these different civilizations working together, even though civilization is pretty loose here. Of civilizations, basically 8 to 10 characters. But you have all these different sort of groups that have been working together in different ways. You even have to learn how to speak the language of one, which is wonderful.
Yeah.
And you imagine that was a problem that they all had to figure out. How do we talk to one another? I mean, there's just a lot of stuff that with that interconnectedness of the levels is also represented sort of in the narrative framing between these sort of different groups. They had to find a way to work together. And what really has been the biggest problem since Cabirus died is there's been no way to keep that going because he was sort of this important force to make that happen. And I don't know, that's all pretty neat. I think that really makes this game stand out as well. It leans on all the Ultima stuff, and I think we'll talk about that a little bit in response to some of the feedback. But it's pretty terrific game. I'm really glad to re-encounter this one. I never would have without the podcast. So a high point for me in the last couple of years.
And it was great to finally finish it.
It is great, despite thinking that you had.
My headcanon had convinced me of that. Maybe
I will say it's
maybe because I didn't want to go back. It's like, no, I finished it. I definitely finished it.
No, I'm totally done with it. Yeah, no, I think it's almost more embarrassing for me to have like played about a half an hour and gone, oh no, I get this. Yeah, this is just like a lesser Wolfenstein,
right?
Or lesser Doom or whatever it was that I was thinking at the time.
God,
but, it's definitely
so not.
It's so much more than that. Yeah. It's totally a different thing, and it totally makes me look forward to Ultima. What is it called? Underworld Ascendant, I guess.
Ascendant, yeah.
Ascension or Ascendant or something.
I'm very intrigued to see what that ends up being all about.
Yeah, for sure. Me too. I mean, they're not an Ultima game, but there's not a lot to Ultima that is really specific. Especially because they were trying to work in the cracks of Dungeons and Dragons and other systems, calling things gazers instead of beholders or what have you, so that they wouldn't get sued. So there's not a lot there that I think you can really copyright except maybe Lord British himself. So, they can probably get away with a lot.
My prediction...
And really capture the feel. Yeah, go ahead.
My prediction of that game based on the name is that you start at the bottom and you go up instead of going down. Yeah.
Oh, how about that? That'd be a bizarre twist. You start off, you're actually a baby fire elemental.
Oh, I like it. And you have to become human.
And you have to become human or
learn all the different ways to...
You have to learn how to play the flute without burning it. Is the really important thing. Okay, we could riff on the silliness of different ideas of how you would take this thing forward, but no, it's been a pleasure to play. So
yeah, wonderful.
It's a great game. Underworld is actually is an anagram of wonderful. No, it's not. I'm just kidding. I know you were sitting there like, really? Is that?
No,
is that true?
I was reading ahead.
Okay, good. Let's turn now to some feedback. We had a couple of reviews, which we appreciate. Those get to us through the iTunes, Apple Podcasts review system. I gave you the first one, which is the long one.
Yeah, it's nice and meaty.
Nice and long, so go ahead and give that a go.
Okay, so subject, an amazing peek behind the curtain of classic games from Mark S. Garcia, who was doing some great fan art of us on Twitter. Appreciate that, Mark. Was he on the stream too? Is that this?
I don't know
Mark?
That Mark's. No, different Mark.
Okay,
Different Mark's
okay,
been on
yeah.
the stream. That's been Mark Eldridge. But Mark Garcia, I called Mark Alan Garcia a week or two ago. He's actually Mark Sean Garcia. So my apologies.
Okay. So his review says, I have some good news and some bad news regarding this podcast. Let's start with the bad news first. The bad news is that it took me over a year and a half from the release of its first episode to discover this podcast. That's it. My own failings and inability to search the podcast store more effectively are the only bits of bad news in this review. Now, on to the good news. In addition to the newly released weekly episode, I have about a year and a half's worth of awesome content from the show's backlog to listen to on my commute to and from work. Brett and Tim are two incredibly articulate, insightful, and seasoned game developers who offer their perspectives as they work their way through a plethora of classic games. Whether you are playing along with them or just listening in as they discuss development choices that positively or in some cases negatively impact a game, their discourse is always informative, engaging, and downright delightful. My otherwise stressful 1-hour commute into work is softened significantly for me when I listen to the DGC podcast, as it often feels like I have two friends along for the ride, keeping me company and talking about the intricacies of game design. If you are stumbling upon this podcast because of my review, then I have some good news and some bad news for you. The bad news is that you have missed 2 years of wonderfully amazing episodes. The good news, you have 2 years worth of episodes with Brett and Tim to keep you entertained. Do yourself a favor and subscribe. This is easily one of the best podcasts out there. Wow. Mark.
Yeah, very generous. Thank you very much, Mark. That's above and beyond the excellent art that I've come to expect.
He's articulate and he does great art.
That's right. Putting us in monocles and top hats and into Metal Gear Solid, as with the last series we did. But yeah,
too kind.
Yeah, very, very generous. And that is our remit in what we're trying to do. And I'm glad we land every now and again. I will take the much shorter review, which is highly recommend from Tater Chip. Great podcast. I'd highly recommend it to anyone with an interest in game design. The hosts are engaging with clear chemistry and humor. So there you go. That's the whole. I gave you the really, really long one. Yeah, you're welcome. So yeah, we've got that chemistry, like, you know, when you're in chemistry class in high school and you do that rotten egg smell thing.
Oh yeah, perfect.
You know, H2SO4 maybe. I forget what it is. No, that's sulfuric acid. Do not try that at home, kids. No. I think it's better than that. We're not just rotten eggs. No. I mean, we're old, but we're not rotten.
Yeah, no.
We're seasoned. We're seasoned. As Mark pointed out.
Better refinement. He did have that in there. Yes, seasoned.
That's right.
He used delightful too, which I think is definitely a stretch in your case. Yeah.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate that. Let's hit the email. I gave you one from Keen.
Yeah,
I might have said Maas. I can't remember which I put in there in the email.
You put both. Maas Neotek Proto, aka Keen. They've written in before, right?
A frequent he has, and he's frequently been in the stream as well. I think he's been to all of my Ultima streams. So the subject is enemy types. It's a short mail. How do devs choose enemy types? Because I thought the choice of an angry tree was curious, as F. Obviously, some enemies are genre staples, like skeletons, bats, whatever, but the trees seemed out of place to me, while the gazers seemed like very cool, inspired design. Moss. Yeah, that's a good, big question. I will definitely say. Yeah, I mean,
what are your thoughts?
So my thinking, and I know I'm more of the Ultima player here. A lot of the things that appeared in lower levels in this dungeon would have been things that you would have discovered pretty late in a game. However, that was gated in the overworld, so you wouldn't necessarily find a tree in the lowest level of whatever they're called, but the bad trees, the evil ents, or whatever they're supposed to be called in Ultima, or even the gazers. You wouldn't have run into in the sort of little areas around towns and things like that. You would have had to kind of go hunting for them in the overworld in Ultima 6 or 7 or what have you around this time. So I think that that's kind of a mismatch between the sort of experience that you would have had in Ultima with the mainline series and what they tried to do with this one. I think that's the big problem with that mismatch. I mean, the fire elementals seem fine, perfectly well motivated, kind of hard to find anywhere else. But yeah, the trees are like, huh?
Yeah.
Like, why is there a evil plant thing?
Yeah.
7 levels below ground.
They probably have, I mean, to your point, don't you think probably Ultima has essentially their version of the monster manual, and they just kind of probably plucked different things they've had before and just kind of, I also in my head
do, but it's not super, it's not super broad. You have to keep in mind that at the time there were not, any given game probably only had somewhere under 20 enemies.
Yeah. I think, when I saw the tree the first time, I just felt like it was probably just variety. They just wanted to kind of get some tropes in there, some fantasy tropes, not necessarily, because to be honest, for RPGs, Ents stolen from Tolkien are pretty tropey. They're staples as well. It's just, they were just weird to have them here. My headcanon version of this for the tree specifically was something to do with the whole portal thing that's going on, with the demon and stuff. And maybe they came in because of all the evil stuff going on and the wizards, brought them in accidentally or something like that. Was what I made up.
Yeah. I think that's all possible. I think it's really just, we're going to adapt the lore that we have and sort of run with it. But, it's,
we try to be way more cohesive these days, of course. So,
yeah, I was going to say, I think the broader question, for us, I think the game that we've worked on together is, as far as this goes, is Republic Commando. And I think that those enemies were a lot more motivated, even though they also were kind of coming from the Star Wars universe. But we parceled them out in sort of a more, and they do this here too as well, in sort of a more difficulty focused way. As well as for us trying to find ways to mix and match archetypes of, this is a heavy versus sort of a light character who is maybe more melee, so he's in your face, while somebody from further back is going to do some damage or what have you. That's a game I sort of, from our own shared history, I would lean on to sort of think about that stuff. Do you have any thoughts about that?
No, my own opinions that I feel like a little bit maybe what he's asking, and to his point about the genre staples, is I'm really a big fan of orthogonal design in enemies, and I always have felt like Halo's done a good job of that, and so I'm biased now, but we definitely were inspired by that with Republic Commando, and I think having those, again, having them playing off of each other is really interesting. You didn't really get a lot of that in this game because it's just not deep enough combat for that to happen.
And there's also costs to having lots of characters on the screen, even at this time. So
the one thing I will say that I was surprised, I didn't remember this, but they did at least try to lean into the types of enemies that they're and the damages that they did and the damage you could do to them, because they had like that undead damage spell, and then you could shoot lightning at things, and I'm wondering if the lightning did more damage or less damage to other things, and then you had a resist fire spell that you could put on yourself when you're dealing with the fire elementals, and the fact that they had they kept track of, I could do this spell against undead and it would do more damage, so at least they had classifications, and you could see some of that kind of subsystem was definitely a staple of RPGs at the time too, especially there's Final Fantasy, right, with healing undead, using healing spells,
or different status effects and things like that. There's also sort of there's sort of this abstraction level of like, we're going to have these sort of more interesting and more complicated spells as you go on, and matching the challenges to those instead of the other way around. Like, oh, we're going to design these creatures that make more sense the further down you go. It does sort of feel a little bit like the sort of top down versus bottom up approach that we talked about previously.
Yeah.
But again, still very heavily influenced just by the Ultima IP. So, and I think that there may be some mismatch there. You say, well, maybe they have something more like a monster manual. I mean, the monster manual is, 100 pages of different monsters, 2 or 3 to a page. They probably had under 30 total for
So all of Ultima, you mean?
Yeah, for all of Ultima. Yeah. I really am hard pressed. I mean, I think most of the enemies show up in this game, so there's just not a lot to work with, and they may not have felt like they could. They may not have wanted. Actually, I wouldn't even put it the other way, but I'd say they may not have wanted to just spend the energy to come up with something new when they were already spending so much energy on coming up with all kinds of other things that were new. So having to also work with new IP stuff might have been kind of, I don't know, beyond their remit or beyond their sort of interest at the time. So,
I wonder.
Yeah, I mean,
I wonder if
go
shooting. I wonder if using fireball on those trees does more damage.
I bet it does.
Yeah, that's pretty. I assume so too. It's cool. Again, variety of systems. So.
Yep. Yeah, a lot of variety of stuff.
Surprise, right? Sometimes they throw things in there just to kind of surprise you. Did you? There was those weird ghosts.
Yeah, the ghosts that flicker in and out.
Yeah, they were kind of a different shape, and
I loved them.
They were definitely cool, but I only saw them in that one room.
Yep, there's that one room that had 2 of them.
Yeah, very odd.
Yeah, very strange. And the other ghosts, I think, were definitely part of Ultima, and I don't know what those things were specifically, so I don't know. I was happy that a lot of D&D tropes for undead did not cross over into Ultima, like losing levels to things and stuff like that, or XP, because that's totally a D&D thing. Like, at least D&D of this era is like, oh, you got hit by a wraith, you lose a level.
Yeah.
That would not work well. That would not translate to games. However, it's been done in D&D licensed games, so I'm glad they kind of didn't do that stuff. So anyway, I'm pretty sure that has made its way over, and you had that happen in games, and you just be like, well, I guess I'll reload.
That's all it causes you to do. It's not really
right. I mean, it's not a good thing. It's not a good thing in game, especially. I mean, that's actually a thing with this game, because there are no monster spawners really.
Yeah.
If you had those sorts of negative effects, you'd effectively just be cut off from parts of your skill tree entirely, and maybe for the rest of the game. And because they didn't have monster spawners of any kind, even though there were a couple places where it seemed like if you went back, there might be another monster or two. It really wasn't. It really
closed network.
It felt like a bug when it happened. It felt like, oh, I thought I killed everything on this level. So it didn't make a lot of sense when you'd run across something that suddenly appeared. Because it felt like this game's ecology was sort of built into its design and not generative or like a roguelike of some kind, or Diablo or something that came around this time. Actually, Diablo's around the same time, so maybe a few years later, 96 or so. But yeah, I mean, it's just interesting stuff. I have the last question. This is from Brian Taylor, who was part of the Brainy Sphere with me back in the day. Friend of mine and friend of the cast. He was in a lot of the streams. He says, balance question. And his question, he had asked me on the stream, and I asked him to send an email, as did Maas. Excuse me. It says, how do you balance something for a variety of character classes in an organic way so that a player is not presented with a situation that has, for example, obvious path A for combat and obvious path B for stealth? And is it important for those two paths to be equally engaging, or do you see differences between classes as a kind of micro difficulty level within the global difficulty level? I mean, how do you decide which is more important? And he also goes on to say, I know that's pretty broad. So scope down. How about in a shooter where you're designing and tuning encounters for different kinds of weapons? For example, a sniper rifle versus a shotgun versus a melee weapon. What kind of things going into balancing for multiple approaches? Level geometry itself is hard to change. Can you tweak AI, accuracy, or damage numbers based on the player's actions? Do you just keep everything under the hood the same and hope for the best? And he sort of excludes things like Metal Gear Solid, where the sort of clunky combat system serves to push you towards one or particular approaches in different areas. That's a broad question, and I know when it came up in the stream, people were talking about Skyrim and things like that as different approaches, but Skyrim's a different sort of game from the games that we're talking about with Ultima Underworld and and games of this era. So I'm not sure it applies. I think open world games are very different, and we can talk about that in a moment. The one that comes naturally to mind, though, is Deus Ex, which clearly has like, oh, you're event crawling, dude.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Paths versus, oh, you'll just kill anybody, dude. Kind of paths. And that even doesn't seem as in place in System Shock 2. So I don't know. It seems like we've played a couple games and intend to play at least one of these games where there's different answers to these questions. Your thoughts?
Oh man, this is.
I just threw the hand grenade in your lap.
Yeah. I mean, it is. I mean, first of all, for this kind of game, I have to admit I don't know. For RPGs, I just haven't worked on one, and I haven't been in the numbers of that stuff. I can make some educated guesses, maybe, but for the games I've worked on, and from just a game theory perspective on things that I've played, it's a combination of things, in my opinion, and there is definitely a lot of minutia in the tuning of the systems. Like, first of all, I think when you're going to have multiple classes like that, you're going to need to invest in systems pretty heavily, so you can actually have those systems interdependent on each other and then tune them all separately as you go and play through and iterate. The other thing is iteration is going to end up being pretty key. I don't know if there's really, other than a fully procedural game, like a roguelike or something like that, or a fully systemic game, or a simulation game or something. And I mean like a Civilization or something, not like this kind of simulation. It's other than procedural, you're not going to be able to see everything coming. So you need to kind of set yourself up for a foundation of each of the systems having enough knobs and data-driven tunable variables to fiddle with them. And the only way that I've seen it is really just through iteration, to kind of test some things out, have some hypotheses, and then clash them all together and see what sticks. And I'm not talking about the Deus Ex version, because like you said, those are more heavily designed, because level design ends up playing a big role in that. And they try to telegraph, their solution was to telegraph what your possibilities were by the way they designed the spaces themselves and the missions. Right. But in a game like this, there's so many variables. That's why I think that's why I mentioned QA earlier. QA ends up being a really important role for stuff like this, I would assume.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that people were speculating about on the stream was, what if you got to level 7 and had been purely a mage? Just you had put everything into ways to improve your mana. Mm-hmm. This might have been a really tough experience for you at that point. I mean, hopefully you'd be able to find a medallion, and
I don't think this game was balanced well to be for all the situations.
Fair enough. Yeah, no, it probably wasn't. I think it's possible these days actually to do different sorts of things. I worked on a design for a game, at least, that I guess never actually got made. But the plan was to actually make the AI respond to different things that you chose to do. Like if you leaned on, for example, a shotgun, that the enemies would spread out naturally. They would just want to be apart from one another because you had a weapon that directed sort of damage sort of in this cone or what have you. Whereas if you had a slower firing weapon, that them bunching up wouldn't be a problem because at least one of them would get through and things like that. So I think there are design solutions depending on the sort of effect that you want to create to utilize to do this stuff. I do agree that at this time their approach was more, well, you can choose to put your skill points into whatever, and if you make a bad choice, that's on you. I think that that's unfortunate, but probably the best they had available to them at the time. In an open world game, like Skyrim, for example, there are so many different skills that you can be putting things into. There's definitely an intention that by the time you're sort of at the second tier of investing in any one of those skills, that they are tools that you can use to get through some of the challenges. So even if you're using, and I'm not super, even though I worked on these games, I'm not super a lore guy, so whatever. But like you might start off with a mild charm spell, but then you get a thing that actually converts an enemy to work for you. So now instead of actually being good at combat yourself, you just go and charm enemies when you go into areas and they do the work for you. And you just hope that they live long enough that you can either recover mana and convert another one, or they do enough damage that they can help you to get through. And you maybe hire people to work alongside you, henchmen of different kinds to get through there. It's really hard to balance an RPG. And I've lamented many times on this podcast that I tend to choose the fringe character classes and they tend not to work out very well. So I don't think anybody has a good answer. My answer would be, if it's really important to you that everybody finishes despite what choices they make, you need to do a lot of engineering and design around making that a possible thing. Even if that means lowering the difficulty because your main character is a bard, or what have you. I think that's perfectly valid. And I think it's also fine to design in such a way that it feels like, oh, I just got through by the skin of my teeth. Even though that's purely numerically determined that you might feel that way. I would prefer any of that to getting 50 hours into a game and discovering that I can't finish. So it's a tricky thing, and it's evolved over the last 25, 30 years for sure. So
it's a good one. Big topic.
Yeah, it's a big topic and not one we can probably answer definitively here, but there's some sort of scratched out notes and thoughts. So thanks for the question, Brian. Thanks for the question, Maas, and thanks for the reviews, Mark and Tater Chips, I believe it was. I think I should let you introduce our next game. I'll make a note that we do plan to actually have an interview, or maybe possibly two, for this series. Yeah, we haven't really figured out the format.
We're working on it,
but we are kind of up against GDC, which is happening
week after next.
I was going to say in under a week from when you will actually get this podcast delivered to you. So it's
not a good time to get guests on.
Yeah, it's tough to get, especially in the U.S. guests on, because they're probably here and going to GDC, I should say. So we should have some, but they may not be next week. It should be in the near future.
Yeah, we'll do a bonus episode or something in the middle of our next series when we get them. But yeah, we have interest. We don't want to guarantee, we want to promise anything, but we have interest, and so I think Brett and I are fine doing it whenever they're ready, because it'll be fun for us and for you guys to hear that. So stay tuned.
Yeah, in the meantime, what are we playing next there, sir? So we can get started on that.
I can't Wait, talk about some games that I have in my distant memory that I definitely know I finished.
Sure, you did.
No. In some cases, I think multiple times. But we're going to play two classic Sierra games finally. The Sierra Adventure games, kind of the main competitor to the LucasArts Adventure games around the same era. But really, Sierra was at top of the world when they were making these games. And as far as PC gaming goes, these are some of my earliest, fondest memories as a kid, playing these with my dad and stuff. And so we're going to play King's Quest 1 and Space Quest 1. They're both probably 2 sessions each. So we'll be, the series will be sort of classic Sierra games over 4 episodes would be the goal. But they're the classic adventure games where you're going to get stuck from time to time. So, even though they're fairly short, they make up for some of that time because of their structure. So they'll be interesting to play. I haven't replayed these in the modern age of the internet, so it'll be interesting to see how much discipline I have to not look up solutions as I'm playing.
I will almost certainly stream them, so that'll be
that'll be fun. Yeah, I generally do pretty well at not looking up stuff as I go unless I'm up against the deadline. So we'll see how I do this time. I remember getting pretty frustrated at getting stuck at these games. But yeah, so there's going to be a lot to talk about with Sierra because it really was one of those apex PC companies, gaming companies.
Yeah, they were very much at the top of the food chain back then for this sort of game. They sort of leapfrogged the parser-based games. I know that these games are sort of a weird mix. I feel like, is that true? Sort of keyboard.
Yeah, no. Then they get a little bit more GUI centric as they go. But these ones we're going to play are all keyboard. It's all you're typing in sentences.
Okay.
And I don't remember how they deal with inventory though. I don't remember that off the top of my head.
That would be an interesting discovery and discussion. One of the things I sort of know and fear about these games is that they're different from LucasArts adventures in that they are also games that you can fail.
They're not. That was, I think, LucasArts' biggest adventure game clincher and innovation is that they really I think mastered the usability of adventure games despite sometimes the opacity of some of the puzzles. But yeah, the Sierra games.
Hey man, I totally breezed. I breezed through Day of the Tentacle. I don't know what you're talking about, but
yeah. Go wash your car.
I totally did that. Piece of cake. No problems. Anyway, I'm excited. We'll start off with that. Do you want to? I guess we'll. King's Quest is probably the older one, I believe.
Yeah,
is that true?
Play King's Quest 1. Yeah, one.
Okay,
yeah,
so we'll start with that one.
By a year, I think it's 82 and 83, or something like that.
Oh, so it's very old.
Yeah. I think it's 82. Okay. I'm just looking on GOG. They have them on GOG, so. Yeah.
I played around that time. I would have been playing. Wizard and the Princess, which was in 1980, which apparently
it's 86.
Yeah, it's a prequel to this game, believe it or not. I played that on the Apple II with its 64K of memory, which is really all you'd ever need. In any case, we will play that next time. I'm looking forward to playing a different strain of adventure game. I've played text adventures, I've played LucasArts adventures, but I've never played the Sierra strain. So I'm very curious about that. In the meantime, you can send your questions about the podcast or your feedback or just things you'd like us to chat about to devgameclub@gmail.com. And we, of course, very much like to have your reviews on Apple Podcasts. We read all of the ones that we receive. If we don't read yours for some reason, I may not be subscribed to the reviews from your country of origin. So just send us an email and I will track it down. You can find us on Twitter. I'm at Brett_Duville, and he's at
Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end.
And of course, you can find the podcast there at Dev Game Club and on the web at devgameclub.com. Thanks so much. And for now, we'll say good night.
Good night.